So this is a research presentation. But before we talk about research, I'd like to talk to you a bit more about data. You're at a conference hosted by BookNet, so talking about data really shouldn't come as much of a surprise. Let me give you a quick summary of what I'm going to present today. You're going to see a lot of graphs. Sorry, not much I can do about it. You're going to see a mishmash of data from numerous sources. Not sorry. I can promise you, you're not going to see the matrix slide. You know, the one with the binary rain? You're not going to see that. Nor are you going to see a slide with the capital D data on it. You've already got that on your pin. You're going to see a lot of D little data. But it is my hope that the data here will add some insight into the rest of today's presentations and give a bit of a foundation for the rest of the day. So with that, let's get started. Let's step back a bit and take a look at what we're actually talking about. We're talking about, or I'm going to be talking about, these kinds of data. Are there any data scientists in the house? Excellent. I get to say whatever I want, right? That's perfect. How many people here say that data is a huge part of their job? That's almost 100%, and that's not a big surprise. So we're talking about these types of data and what these types of data can do for your jobs. So it's everything from sales data to ethnographic data or netnographic data to consumer data to your internal process data, everything. It all kind of gets mishmashed together and informs our businesses. So we're talking about how we acquire that data. Accurate data collection is essential to maintain the integrity of research, making informed business decisions. For example, in retail sales, data might be collected from mobile applications, website visits, loyalty programs, focus groups, online surveys, all kinds of areas. So we've defined the data, and now we've collected this data. This was really easy. I wish it was always this easy. It's not. We spend an inordinate amount of time collecting data. Much of our working days are spent collecting, normalizing, storing, and analyzing data. After all, it's partly why BookNet exists. Now we have all that data, we've collected it, and this maybe is a sobering thought. 99.5% of all the data we collect never gets analyzed. Okay? So we generate tons and tons of data, which in fact, every second we create so much new data. For example, we perform 40,000 search queries every second on Google, which makes 3.5 searches per day and 1.2 trillion searches per year. On the content side of things, YouTube, probably the most obvious example, posts 400 hours of video uploaded to YouTube every minute. That's 24,000 hours an hour, 576,000 hours a day, 4 million hours a week, and over 210 billion hours a year, and the rate is accelerating. To watch every minute of every video uploaded in a week would require over 100,000 people working full-time, 40 hours a week. And the reason I'm bringing that up is that's content we're competing against as an industry, right? So, and that's just one segment. That's just YouTube videos. That doesn't include Netflix or podcasts or anything else. So there's content overabundance for sure, and it's a challenge. I don't want to just talk about data, though. Data are just plain facts. It doesn't mean anything, right? When data is processed, organized, structured, or presented in a given context so as to make them useful, that's when we get information. That's when we do research. It gives us the information. It allows us to see what's going on and make informed decisions. I'm going to add some context as part of that equation throughout this presentation, but I don't have all the answers. You need to layer on the context of your own business and your own challenges to come up with actionable insights or information. That's why we do research, it's to answer questions. The other thing I wanted to say about research is that it's all about the questions. Technology combined with data are very good at answering, but you still need to know the questions to ask. AI and machine learning are changing how we get answers, but humans are still the best to ask questions. I think Picasso just meant that real intelligence stems from curiosity, or the ability to ask questions. In science and research, it is curiosity that makes you ask questions, and then you go and experiment in order to answer them. So, with that kind of context, here comes the data. So, a little bit of research up front can save a lot of time later. Measure twice, publish once. Keep in mind the context. What does it mean to you? Questions? Is this data foundational or is it informative? What do you need to do? So I'm going to kind of give you some of our data we've collected and some of the research we've done. So last year in Canada, our print book sales data service, which tracks about 85% of the industry, tracked sales on 769,000 unique ISBNs. That's not including ebooks, that's just print books. That's up 10% from the year before. So we're publishing more and more and more. So I asked Bowker, who's the ISBN agency for North America, primarily, what the size of the market was. Last year, there were over 2 million items, new items, listed with a pub date of 2016 in the Bowker ISBN database. 2 million. There's 2 million new items available for sale to our consumers or for reading. That's huge. It goes up and down every year. That isn't just ebooks, too, that's print as well. Our sales data database contains 3 million rows of bibliographic data. At some point, those books have been available in our market. It's a challenge as the market changes. So some context. So keep all that in mind. All those ISBNs flowing around out there. Here's our year-over-year sales in the print book market. That doesn't look good. It's a downward trend. So we're producing more, putting more into the market, but selling less in the print book market anyway. So the dollars were down 3.7% year over year. Actually the units were down more, which I'll talk about in a second. That dollar down was offset a little bit by higher book prices, which I'm going to talk also a little bit more about. So this doesn't include ebook sales. I'll talk to those in a few minutes. It doesn't include some of the online stuff. It includes a little bit, but not all of it. When we look at this by channel, which I'm not going to do here because we don't normally do that, but the channel sales are interesting. Indies were up. Indies were up significantly in Canada year over year. And that's what we're hearing in other markets too. So in the US and the UK, you may have seen lots of mentions of it. Indies were the channel that went up. The other chain bookstores were pretty flat, and the non-traditional bookstores that sell physical books, print books, were down. So that's an interesting context for how you do business. Our market's changing. So this is what it looks like by units over time. The blue line, it's hard to read there. The blue line is this year, and the kind of yellowish orange line is last year. So the big peak towards the end of the graph there, my joke always is that's Halloween. No, it's Christmas. So Christmas we sell 3 times as many books as we do pretty much any other week in the season, and it's the season we make it. So those lines are pretty close to one another, and as I mentioned, the market was pretty much flat between 2015 and 2016. We were down around 5% in units. The market over the last 6 years in Canada for print books looks something like this. That's a trending down line. We'll talk a little bit about that. I'm going to come back to it in a few minutes. Here is from Nielsen BookScan, US data for the same time period. So this is 2010 to 2016, the end of 2016. The orange line is print book sales. This is by quarter, so it's a little different. And the blue line is their pub track data, digital ebook pub track data. So you can see that the orange line, aside from the big peaks, which are Halloween, Christmas, that line kind of went down and is now coming back up. Similar to our line is going down, a little more down than that. So they're saying that the print book market in the US bounced back a little teeny bit. The ebook market, you'll see that line is trending down. So it goes up and then starts to trend down in the last year or so. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. So the market's moving down, and we want to question why, right? Let's look at another data source. Let's add a little more context on top of that. And that's always what we're trying to do at BookNet, is we're trying to add a little more context into the numbers to find out what's going on. So this is also for Nielsen. And I don't know how many people look at this, but this is the Consumer Confidence Index. So this is how confident are consumers in the economy, their life, their choices. It's kind of an amalgamation of a bunch of different things that consumers do. So as you approach 100 and above is a positive consumer confidence. Okay? So just to put that a little bit in context, India last year had the highest consumer confidence at 136. The UK was right about where Canada is, just sitting right at about 100, and the US was up to 123. Okay? So does that affect our market for books? I'm not 100% sure. Our market's down. The consumer confidence in Canada is just slightly trending negative at 99 or 98, which is a number just under 100, so it's pretty close to neutral. But that's something we should look at, right? And put it in context. Is it just books, or are other things not selling well too? And so what are consumers doing? So let's go back to Canada for a second, and back to this graph. If you were looking closely at this graph, you may have noticed that there's a slight change in the downward trend right here. Oh, that's very dark up there. The numbers between 2014 and 2015 would actually bumped up a little bit in Canada. So that's interesting. So we can dig into that. Do people know why? I ask this often. Coloring books, right? So I don't want to beat coloring books to death, but I'm going to. We saw a slight blip up in the market for coloring books, and that pushed the whole market up, right? One subject category can make huge changes, or even one title can make huge changes to the market, market the size of Canada. So what happened last year? Why did we go back down? Well, here's partly why. That BISAC category that contains coloring books was down 15% between 2015 and 2016. And that can pull the whole market down. And so we actually decided to look at that a little bit more and see, well, why? Because we're still selling a lot of coloring books. That might seem like a huge negative number, it is, but we're still selling a lot of coloring books. So why the huge decline? Well, when we look at it by quarter, here's why. In the 2015 numbers, you can see there was hardly any coloring books sold in the first quarter of 2015. But look at that fourth quarter. It was a Christmas thing, right? Everyone got a coloring book, I assume. Are you all coloring in your coloring books? No, no one's coloring in their coloring books. And so we're seeing that effect in the 2016 numbers, right? So it's pretty much flat across 2016. We're still selling a fair number. I'd say it's trending down, maybe not a lot. But that fourth quarter number was down 70% from the year before. So, coloring books move the market. So again, I'm going to layer a little more data on top of those sales numbers to try and get some context. So here's the Google Trends chart for coloring books in Canada. The searches for coloring books. I'm sure people use Google Trends here. So the two peaks in this graph you see are the two Christmases, right? So our Christmas peaks. And then you can see what happened to the searches for coloring books after Christmas this year, right? It's just trending down. This mimics the quarterly unit sales for coloring books. So it adds a little more context to what's going on. One last thing about coloring books. Actually, it's not the last thing. I'm going to come back to them. A huge number of the sales for coloring books moved online in the 2016, right? So what happened is in 2015, a lot of those coloring books were being sold in stores as Christmas presents, and then the market got flooded. And if you go look at Amazon or you look at any online bookseller and look at the coloring books, there's so many of them now, right? So consumer choice changed. And also what happened is we saw a lot of coloring books come out of non-traditional publishing. So indie publishers, CreateSpace, things like that, Scribd, like all kinds of smashwords, they released coloring books, Ingram, into the market at cheaper price points online. And that decreased the physical sales for coloring books, right? So there's a lot of things going on here. And it might be a cautionary tale, or maybe this is our future. Maybe things peak like that and then just die off because the market gets flooded and sales move online or they move digital, right? So the print book market, which is what I'm talking about here, it changes a lot based on a lot of different factors. So enough on coloring book. Let's go back to looking at the print market overall. So this is the subject breakdown, the high-level BISAC subject breakdown for 2016. You can see that we're becoming a very juvenile-dominated market, in the print book market anyway. So 39% of all the books sold in Canada in 2016 were classified as juvenile titles. And then nonfiction 32%, and then fiction 27%. That's changed quite a bit over the last few years. It used to be very, very equal. It was trended much more to fiction to start, and then we were very equal for a couple years at around 30% for each. And now we're switching to juvenile. And there's a lot of factors to that I'll talk a little bit about. You'll notice I tossed that little YA bubble in there. So that 3% of YA titles is actually included in the 39% of juvenile. But we just added BISAC subject category of YA last year. And so we started tracking it in sales data. Retailers are starting to use it, and publishers are starting to supply it. My feeling is that A much higher percentage of that 39 is YA than the 3% that's showing there. But we need publishers to start classifying their books as YA, and I see some librarians in the audience nodding their heads. So it's a really important thing, and other people are going to talk a little bit more about that this afternoon. But please use the YA category. It helps us in this analysis as well. So how does the subject trending look over time? So the kind of green line there in the middle, that's juvenile over the last 5, 6 years. You can see it trending up, taking more and more of the market, with nonfiction and fiction trending down. So I've talked about this before. Nonfiction has been trending down for quite a few years. It actually had a little bounce back last year. But you know, the internet is kind of eating nonfiction's lunch, where the fiction category is kind of getting eaten a little bit by, in the print book market, is getting a little bit eaten by ebooks, right? And so that's why we're seeing some of those downward trends. And then this is based on percentages. So as more books switch to juvenile, as publishers classify more books as juvenile, it takes more percentages away from the other ones. And then the little YA chart at the bottom there, which is not really valid yet, but just showing it. So if you're a sales data subscriber, you've probably seen this chart. This is the subject categories change over year. So the blue line is this year, and the yellow line is last year. So you can see there's some pretty big changes here. Juvenile fiction media tie-in sells a lot of books. It's the number 2 kind of subject category. It's way up there. And that's really dominated by, any guesses? It's a hard one to guess. I had to go look, actually. I would have thought Harry Potter or so, but it's not. It's Paw Patrol. Paw Patrol. There's a lot of Paw Patrol books being sold. So, and then the romance line there that was really big last year and has gone back a little bit, that's gray, right? So one book can move a whole subject category. So if we look at some specific cases of subject categories moving up and down year over year, we see some interesting stuff. So here's 3 subject categories, 3 of the kind of subject categories that saw the most movement year over year. So poetry, in the print book market, I should say. Poetry, literary collections, and thrillers kind of changed the most. So poetry year over year was up almost 80%. Wow, eh? That's a big deal. And while I'm showing some book titles here, and those book titles aren't necessarily the only reason a subject category might move, in the case of poetry, that's why that category moved. Milk and Honey sold really, really well for poetry. But even if you pull Milk and Honey out of the poetry subject category in print, poetry had a very good year. Okay? Part of that is that, I think anyway, the technology and ebooks hasn't really taken that category, right? Because people want poetry books, and it works better in print, I think. So it might be one of the later ones, although there might be people in ebook craft yesterday who would argue with me. Literary collections, again, it was almost one title. A Neil Gaiman book got classified as a literary collection, and that pulled that subject category up, although it did well on its own. And then thriller. Thriller bounces up and down every year based on whether there's a bestseller. And Girl on the Train has been a bestseller in that category for a little while. So categories go up, categories go down. Markets move up, markets move down. You need to put this stuff in context, obviously, of your own business. So here's some of the bestsellers from last year. This is 7 of the top 10 bestsellers. I show the slide, A, because I like to call out the bestsellers, so you have some context, again, of what's going on in the market. And also, it's interesting, when I showed this slide, I didn't show it at this conference last year, but I showed it at other conferences for 2015. All of the books were coloring books. 9 of the top 10 bestsellers in 2015 were coloring books. None of the top 20 bestsellers in Canada were coloring books in 2016. So that's just a market shift. Okay? So this and lots more data you can get through sales data if you're a sales data subscriber, or just released last week is our annual, which breaks down print book sales by subject category, title, author, format, binding, price point. You can pick that up from our website. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit and talk a little bit about reading and not about book buying. So every year we conduct a yearly online reading survey, or leisure time survey as we call it, of Canadians. And why do we do this? BookNet's mostly a sales and supply chain organization. We do this because it adds context to the data we already capture, and we like to share it back with you. So what we want to know is reading going down or sales going down? Are the two things correlated to one another? Is there a causation there? We want to know how people are spending their time. I've talked a little bit already about content overabundance. How is that affecting people's book buying and reading? So that's why we do this reading study. So we asked about 750 book reading Canadians every year about their leisure habits. And then we correlate that sometimes to sales data and sometimes not. So these are adults only, by the way, in this case. So you've seen us share these. These are in order, from this side to that side. This is how Canadians tell us they're spending their leisure time. The first one is the internet. And that's been the case since we've been collecting data for 5 years now. So people spend most of their leisure time, they tell us, on the internet. The second is walking little children. No, it's hanging out with your family. So family bounces up and down. Luckily, it's still pretty high. It's number 2. So number 3 is TV. Not a big surprise, maybe. It's actually been going down year over year because people, it's sometimes hard to get Canadians, when they're answering surveys like this, to equate watching TV online with watching TV on TVs, right? So I think some of that is shifting to the internet, and that's why the internet number is going up and the TV number is going down. And then movies, and then books, reading books specifically, or listening to books. So we're not just talking about reading magazine articles or reading on the internet, which is probably going up. This is books, because that's what we're interested in. People are spending an average of 20 minutes every day just on Instagram, people that are online. That's a huge amount of time. So, this is what we're competing in. This is the world that we're competing in. Books has moved up and down between the 3rd and 4th position over the last few years, but the numbers haven't changed all that much. Okay. I've showed slides like this before, and I just find it interesting. And again, it's adding more context to the data. So the survey tool we use for conducting our leisure surveys is called Ask Your Target Market. If you haven't ever looked at it, I've mentioned it here before in other sessions. I'd recommend looking at it. It's really great for running quick surveys, A/B testing, all kinds of stuff. And one of the things it does, SurveyMonkey does this now too. One of the things it does, besides just allowing you to ask questionnaires and doing the analysis of the data, is it allows you to correlate your data against all of the data for everyone else's questionnaires. So they have 20 million people, and they do questionnaires on car buying and on media consumption and all kinds of stuff. So you can take your results and push them into the database to see how they correlate to behavior of consumers in other media categories and things like that. So this is the leisure time question. Sorry, it's a little hard to read, so I'll explain what's going on here. This is the leisure time question. And I've plotted a couple of the choices from the leisure time question around the outside here, not all of them. And so what you'll see is as things are A2 reading here, this is people that say that they spent time reading. And so I pulled those people out of the database and kind of asked, well, what else do those people do? What other surveys do you have that correlate to those people who responded that reading was one of their top 2 activities? So I've played with the data here to get some jokes. But you can do this for more important things than what I've done. Obviously, readers need glasses, I guess, because they correlate really strongly with using both prescription eyeglasses and going to the optometrist. So good for you, everyone, looking after your eyes. I'm happy to see that. I'm assuming everyone here correlates as a reader. You all listen to oldies. Nice. It's very comforting. You volunteer. That's great. Thank you. We all thank you. You are a freelance writer, a lot of you, so that's great. That shouldn't come as a surprise. And you live in a household of 2 or more. So you can do this with all kinds of stuff. Other times when I've done this, I've pulled out the fact that there's a strong correlation between people who read and people who use canvas shopping bags, or like premium olive oils. Now, those are kind of jokes. But you can correlate to things that may be of interest to you, right? So you could correlate to people who go to movies, for instance, or particular movies, or that kind of stuff, and then maybe that's a good marketing channel for you, or a good place to have your books. Anyway, so AYTM is the tool. It's a powerful tool for adding context to some of your data if you use them to run your surveys. So another question we ask in the leisure time study is, have you read a book in the last year? So it's trending down. The number of people said they've read or listened to a book in the last year, while the numbers here are trending down, they're just barely outside the margin of error. I'm not sure we should be too alarmed at this point about this, but if the trend continues in this path, it's likely to have a big impact on what we do, and it's something we'll want to watch. So we put this in context with the sales, right? Again, it's within just barely outside the margin of error, which is about 4% for this survey. So it's trending down, so we'll watch it. We also look, adding more context again to the data. This is US, so this is from Gallup. So the US data shows about 84% of Americans read a book last year. So that's pretty close to what we had at about 82, 84%. They do their survey over the telephone. We do our survey over the internet. So that's another thing. There's a little bit of bias. You have to kind of be able to read to use the internet. So it kind of works that way. 35% of Americans say they read more than 11 books last year. 53% of young adults read between 1 and 10 books last year. And 73% preferred printed books to e-readers or audiobooks in the US. We have some of that here too. So 38%, on the other side of that trending line is 38% of our readers say their book reading listening has increased in the last year. This is up almost 5% over the previous year, so it's outside the margin of error. Also, the people say that the people that say that the reading decreased from the previous year went down by outside the margin of error about 5% too. So that's good. People are reading more. The people who are reading more. So we asked them what formats they read. So print formats stayed about the same. 90% of our respondents say they primarily read print books. Audiobooks went up, about 26% of our respondents. It was just up slightly. And ebooks went down. So 48% of our readers say they read ebooks. That's down 3% year over year, and down 10% since we started in 2014, since we kept track that way in 2014. And someone's writing an important email to a colleague. So this is a busy slide. This is just a breakdown of age by format. And all I wanted to call out here is that audiobooks, which we'll talk more about this afternoon, and print books tend to trend younger. The people who are reading those are of a younger age group. Whereas ebooks, actually, maybe that's contrary, I'm not sure, tend to be a little bit older audience for reading. Could be lots of accessibility reasons for that. So we also ask which devices. Don't like to spend a ton of time on devices, but it's an interesting thing. So people who read ebooks on their computer have stayed about the same. E-readers has gone down significantly, as we've probably heard lots of places. Tablets have stayed roughly the same, and smartphone reading has gone up significantly, up almost 20% year over year. So almost all the people who are reading on e-readers seem to have switched to smartphones. Okay, so that's just our leisure data. We'll release a lot more of that leisure data on our blog. So subscribe to our e-news or go to our blog. We'll release almost all of it at some point for free, so it's there and you can get it to add context to your own data. So I want to talk a little bit about our consumer survey. So for the last 4 years or so, we've been surveying consumers on their book buying habits. And this, again, adds us to add another context to the data we already capture. So we want to understand consumer buying patterns. It helps us understand the size of the market. So we survey over the course of the year about 2,000 Canadians quarterly on their buying habits. So it's a pretty big sample size, and it's temporal. We do it over time, so we can trend behavior over time. Online sales and global marketplaces create unexpected trends that can seemingly pop out of the blue. Erratic demand is more and more the norm in our business. So we need to look at more and more data, and I've talked a little bit about coloring books and erratic demand, and we need to look at how people are buying stuff. So that's why we look at consumer data. So what is this? People buy heart books. In 2015, our consumers, the people who buy books in Canada, bought about 2.8 books a month. Okay, that's pretty good. In 2016, that fell to 2.6 books a month. Okay? Again, just inside the margin of error, so probably not something to be overly concerned about, but if we put it in the context of the reading data and we continue to see this falling, then we're concerned, right? What's going on? Again, context. Maybe torrenting. I will say, and I don't have the slide here because we don't get great data on that, we're seeing a lot more answers into our questionnaire about when we ask people where they get their books, both in the reading data and the buying data, we're seeing a lot more torrent answers. So I don't want to send a piracy alarm, but that comes up more and more. So let's look at formats for a second. Formats over time. You can see paperbacks are at the very top there. They're about 50% of the market and stay about that. Hardcovers around 20%, and then ebooks around 15% or so, 17%, I should say. So it's been trending up and down, and actually our ebook numbers have gone down a little bit over time. So in 2013, 20% of the books bought from our panel were ebooks. In 2016, it was 17%. So over the last kind of 3 or 4 years, it's gone down about 4% in ebooks. Maybe that's all gone to hardcover books. Another way to look at this is that in 2016, about 20% of our panelists or respondents to our surveys bought an ebook. In 2015, it was about 23%. So less of them are actually buying ebooks. And 3.7%, close to 4% in 2016 of people who only buy books bought ebooks. Sorry, only buy ebooks bought ebooks. So that number has stayed consistent across all the years. So about 4% of the people that respond to our survey, 4% of Canadians, only buy ebooks, and that number hasn't changed. So while we've seen the overall ebook number go down, the people who have committed to ebooks have really committed to ebooks. Price is probably not a factor for them. So again, just quickly, Nielsen data at the US. The print market there is blue over the last few years. The yellowish orange market is the ebook. What you can see is that they're showing in the US that print book market has gone up and that the ebook market has gone down. Okay? Probably related to something I'll talk about shortly. So we also look at channels and where people are buying their books. Last year, 48% of the book purchases from our panel happened online across all formats. That's up from 46% the year before. Lest we forget, all audiobooks and ebooks are purchased online. I was at Digital Book World a couple weeks ago. Some of you may have been there or saw the presentations that Data Guy did. Data Guy, who's a pundit in the US, who does a lot of analysis of book numbers, said that 69% of all book purchases in the US were done online across formats. That's almost 70%. And when you break it down by category, and this is a busy slide, US sales of adult fiction and nonfiction, three-quarters of all of those books are sold online now, 75%, okay, across all formats in the US. We're not there yet. We're heading in that direction, maybe. So we can look at channels again from our data and just break it down a little bit more. 38% of books were sold online, and you'll say, wait a minute, you said 48%. That's because I took the mobile and the ebook audio and added them into the 38 to get 48. Bookstores, about 34, grocery, discount are there. And then down in the very corner there, hard to see on that slide, is the year-over-year trends. And I kind of talked about those at the beginning. Online has gone up. Bookstores have stayed about the same. The non-traditionals have gone down a little bit, and ebook has gone down a little bit. So I've talked a little bit about path to purchase and how important this is when we're looking at retailers and book buying. So how are our book buyers interacting with the books, buying them, finding them, all of those information. So this is probably something you're talking about in your own companies and how important it is. Not sure how many people play with Google Barometer. Google Barometer is another free Google tool that has all kinds of data and all kinds of serving, and it's very, very cool. I love to play with this stuff. So you can go and play with Google Barometer whenever you want. So I was playing with it to look at awareness, because I'm always curious about awareness. How are book buyers becoming aware of the books they buy? So the blue line is from Google Barometer for Canada, and it's across all product categories. So they don't do just books, unfortunately, for Canada, but it's across all product categories, which still adds some context to the data. So the red line is actually just books from our panel. So I've taken all of our awareness and kind of grouped it into the same buckets as Google Barometer. So about 28% of book buyers became aware of the book they bought because they had previous experience with that author series, usually. The next one along there is discussions, getting recommendations from people. That they did pre-purchase research, looking into prices, things like that, and how that correlates to just general. Advertising is not a big driver for awareness, or not traditional advertising anyway, and then other, which may be non-traditional advertising. So you can play with Google Barometer and look at our research and kind of see how they go together. Looking, again, just back at our specific awareness, these are the top ways that awareness is created across all the book sales that we have over the last 3 years or so. So. The book buyer has read the series of the author before. They were browsing physically or online and became aware of that title and bought the book. They got a recommendation or a review, or they follow the author of the series online, in social media usually. This is followed pretty closely by bestseller lists as the fifth one. So let's look at a few of these in more detail. I'm running out of time, so I won't take a ton. But awareness, when we look at that browsing category, this is how the browsing category breaks down. So it breaks down evenly when we ask people how they become aware. 50% of awareness for browsing is created online, and 50% is created in the physical store. And then when we further break that down, the physical awareness, or talking to people or going in store, is dominated by store, by browsing inside the store. And that's what that means. And then online awareness is dominated by bookseller websites. That shouldn't come as a big surprise. People go to Amazon and Kobo and Indigo and browse around on the website and find stuff. And then other websites are searches, and then review websites are things like Goodreads, and then online communities. So just back to these again, I'll pick one more and just do it quickly. Recommendations and reviews, another one we spend a lot of time looking at and isn't very important. So in person is the top way that recommendations and reviews are conveyed that create awareness. Online is pretty close, and then magazines and newspapers, and then radio and TV. It's been subtly shifting to online over the last few years. And so working down our path to purchase, the next step is comparison. So we ask our book buyers, do they compare prices? Do they compare books? And yes, they do compare prices. I'll talk a little bit. It's not the most important things, but they do compare prices. We can go back to Google Barometer and look at other product categories. About 50% of people purchasing that Google Barometer is tracking, people do compare prices. So we can put those two in context. But in our book buyers, the number one reason that they purchase a particular book at a particular place is convenience. And that's been the same since we started surveying. They want it quick, they want it easy, they want to have a nice experience. That's what the convenience is. Price is a pretty close second, and it's important, and it's there. And then, especially in physical, selection and service are really, really important. So this is all important, the experience that our book buyers and readers are having. Let's look at price just quickly. The top line here, this is price for fiction over the last year. The top is the average list price of the books from the metadata we've captured from all of the publishers, published in 2016. So ebooks, the average price is $9.63. Hardcover, about $34. Paperback, about $17. The pub date, the second row is the average list price for books just pubbed in 2016. You can see trending up in most categories, except for paperback. And then the kind of purplish row, that's what consumers are telling us they're paying for those books. So this is at the till with discount. So about $8.22 for an ebook, about $18.64 for a hardcover, and about $11 for a paperback. So it's an interesting thing to monitor and watch. So back to Google Barometer. The other thing we'd like to do is once they've bought the book, we want them to get into that review and recommendation area, right? Because it's so important to selling a book to the next person. So Google Barometer says it's important for all product categories. It's really important for books. So just quickly, this is some of the places that people are telling us that they do with books afterwards. They discuss them online. They really discuss them with other people. They actively participate in online communities. They read interviews or articles about the books. They read book reviews in printed magazines. These are numbers we want to see go up, right? So we can measure this and put it in the context of the marketing work you're doing. And then, where should you take your information online? Well, take it to Facebook, obviously. This is from our book buyer groups. So this is not just overall in Canada, although it kind of mirrors that. Book buyers predominantly use Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, and Pinterest. And then we also asked specifically about book sites. And book sites, social online book communities, heavily dominated by Goodreads. That probably doesn't come as a surprise at all. But Wattpad and 49th Shelf do trend in our data. So those sites do get some interest from consumers and book buyers. It's low, but they're there, and it's actually going up a little bit. So you can play, I've showed this before too, you can play with the Path to Purchase line tool on Google Trends and in Google Insights. It's really kind of interesting. And you can actually do books and literature for the US there. And you can see channels to the left tend to play an early and assisting role in the typical sale, while channels to the right are more likely to be the last interaction before a purchase. This tool and the data that we collect, and probably the data you're collecting yourselves, is really, really important for creating buyer personas, right? Who are your consumers? Who are your readers? What do they do? What are their journeys? And that's really the path to purchase. In the tech world, we talk about user journeys all the time. It's really important also in the marketing we're doing here. So quickly, another thing we've just started to do is release genre studies. So you may have seen these. This is a combination, and this is a tool that we've given you as a little basis for creating buyer personas or the path to purchase. So we've taken the information we collect in our consumer data, and we've mixed it with sales data, and we've come up with these reports. They're available now. So this is our research intern, Kitty. She's working in the tools that we give our interns to create these reports. Does anyone want to be an intern? She pours through a lot of the data, comes up with stuff like this. I'm not going to spend a ton of time because you can get the reports. This is a comparison of biography to mystery buyers. Biography buyers are younger. Mystery buyers are older. 68% of mystery buyers are over 45, whereas only 40% of book buyers, biography buyers are over 45. We can also look at format breakdown. Mystery books are dominated by ebook format. That shouldn't come as a surprise. Biography is a lot less so. We can look at recommendations, author events, author series. This is where the awareness for those subject categories is created. We can look at what they paid and if they took a discount and how they got those discounts, what they paid compared to the two studies. So we've already have the mystery study out. Biography and autobiography will be out next week. Science fiction will be out next month. And then we'll follow those up with a new report every month. If you're a sales data subscriber, you get them for free. So if your company subscribes and you don't have them, please get in touch. If you're not a sales data subscriber, you can buy them for the cheap price of $25, and you can subscribe for $100. So I'm almost out of time, but I wanted to touch on prediction. I usually don't like to make predictions because it's hard, and more often than that, it's a fool's game. Think of all those pundits who said that ebooks would be 50% of the market by X. Or people who predicted that Villanova was going to win March Madness. Me. Prediction is hard. People and the world are weird, and they do weird things. If you want to read about prediction, I can highly recommend Michael Lewis's The Undoing Project. It goes into the weirdness of people and why prediction is so difficult. So now why am I talking about prediction when I've just said it's impossible and I don't want to do it? Because last year I showed this slide up here talking about tiny houses and the tiny house movement. So I thought, I was reviewing my slide deck from last year, and I thought, well, I should go back and look and see what happened with the tiny house movement. So the first place I always go is Google Trends. Google Trends, when you search for tiny homes, I'd say that's still trending up, right? Tiny homes are still a thing. And home and garden TV is on in my house a lot. It seems like every second show is tiny homes. It drives me nuts. There are a lot of books on tiny homes. I can highly recommend Cabin Porn. ISBN is there. Please go and get Cabin Porn. So I thought, well, I'll look at the sales of tiny houses. Unfortunately, it's not clear-cut. They're not trending up. I don't think that's a trend up, but they're still selling very well. Part of the problem here may be there's no BISAC subject category specifically for tiny houses, right? So you have to take an amalgamation of a bunch of subject categories, still not trending up. So then I thought, well, maybe I'm just not wide enough. Maybe I need to look at homesteading. There's a lot of homesteading stuff. Or maybe I should look at Marie Kondo, because if you are moving in a tiny home, you've got to get rid of your stuff, right? It's all about decluttering. So the red line there is still tiny homes, still trending up. The yellow line is Marie Kondo, trending down. Homesteading, staying pretty much flat. So maybe the Marie Kondo thing is gone, but tiny homes are still a thing. So I don't know the answer. Is it still trending up? Should you go and publish more tiny home books? I don't know. We'll check next year, right? And I'll leave you with one quote. I'm a little over time, because every talk in Canada, even tangentially about media consumption, by law, must end with a McLuhan quote. So I've always been very careful never to predict anything that has not already happened. We're always curious what you want to know. So please get in touch with the research at BookNet Canada with your comments, questions, suggestions. No question, as I started, is a bad question. We want to know it. Get in touch with us. Thanks very much.